I just want to spend a few minutes testing the analogy between atheism and vegetarianism. I made a video about this last week in response to a video by 2B Serious. Basically just saying that I wasn't really thinking in terms of analogy at the time. I was basically just echoing that phrase that various well-known atheists like Dawkins and people have used, that atheists, most people don't believe in God, so atheists just go one God further. And I was saying that, that in a sense we're all vegetarians because, everybody has animals that they don't eat, houseflies or moles or badgers or cats and dogs and fellow humans, those kind of things. Vegetarians just go a few animals further and join that parallel. And so I'm just thinking about through, and is there other aspects of that could be drawn out to see if the analogy has any legs, really. And I suppose I'm thinking about this in terms of a video I watched by Douglas Hofstadter. Really good video, actually. We were talking about analogical thinking. If I remember, I'll put it in the description box. And he was being quite rigorous about what an analogy was and the role that analogy plays in cognitive processes. And for him, he postulates it plays quite a central role, actually. That a lot of the thinking we do, the categorizations that we engage in, the abstract cognitive reasoning potentials that we have are a result of analogy, which is fascinating, I thought. But yeah, so let's just test this a little bit further, so I can take it any further. I mean, the root of analogy, or the simplest way of putting an analogy, as Hofstadter says, is when you compare things in a form A is to B as C is to D. A is to B as C is to D. So, for example, and this again is Hofstadter's example, shoe is to foot as glove is to hand. Shoe is to foot as glove is to hand. And there's analogies between them, and you can spin out what those analogies are. One is the covering for the other. One goes inside of the other. They have parallel relationships. All the four things are different. The A, the B, the C and the D are all different things. But the relationship between A and B has strong similarities to the relationships between C and D. So that's the basis of an analogy. So if I can just play that across in terms of atheism and vegetarianism, what would that mean? That's the first thing. And so we'd have to say that atheism is to God as vegetarianism is to meat. That's kind of how that works, I think. At least that's one way of doing it. Atheism is to God as vegetarianism is to meat. What does that mean? Is there a parallel between those relationships? I suggested one in that previous video, that the relationship is to do with what gets called meat. For atheists, and what gets called God. For atheists, nothing gets called God, whereas for theists, some things do get called God. And paralleling that in analogical terms, for vegetarians, nothing gets called meat, whereas for carnivores, some things do get called meat. So I think the analogy A is to B, C is to D at least holds for that bit. But I thought I'd just see if I can take it one step further and talk about belief. Because at first blush, when I'm thinking about this, it seems to fall apart at that point. Because obviously atheists believe in God, and I beg your pardon, theists believe in God and atheists don't. But does it make sense to say that carnivores believe in meat and atheists, and vegetarians don't believe in meat? Does that make sense? And at first it seems like nonsense, but I think it does in a kind of way make sense. Because I'm a vegetarian, and when I say believe in, obviously I don't mean I do not believe in the existence of meat in the world. No, let me rephrase that. I'm not saying I don't believe in the existence of butcher's shops, nor am I believing in the existence of recipes that contain the flesh of animals, nor am I saying I don't believe in the existence of McDonald's burgers. All of this stuff I recognise. But do I believe in this concept of meat? And I think I have to say I don't. Strictly speaking, because meat, at least how the word is used now, means, flesh of animals processed for human consumption. That's what it means, isn't it? And I don't believe in that. I don't believe that there is such a thing as the flesh of animals processed for human consumption. I see the flesh of animals, and I see it being processed in certain ways, but I don't believe that that transforms it into this other substance called meat. And I think a lot of carnivores would actually agree with me on that, because there's lots of fleshes of animals that's processed for human consumption, which they would not call meat. You know, I'm thinking of things like tripe and sweetbreads and brawn and the various bits of offal that come out of animals, including the bits you don't eat. You know, there's lots of pieces of an animal that you would not want to eat. You know, the intestines are probably not very tasty. I don't know, the cartilage around the throat of an animal probably wouldn't be very tasty. So you probably wouldn't say that was meat, even though, you know, to all intents and purposes it comes from the same source. And the hooves, you know, would you say that the hooves were meat? I mean, the fact that we do eat them, you know, because they get blended into a paste and then put into McDonald's milkshakes, does that mean that it's meat? No, it isn't. You know, we don't say those things are meat. So so even for a carnivore, not all processed animal flesh is meat. Meat is a particular kind of social definition, really, of what? It's not an objective substance out there in the world that you either believe in or don't believe in. It's an invention, a social invention. And for vegetarians, we don't, I think, personally, I don't think we believe any of that part of an animal is this thing called meat. Meat is a kind of mythical substance. Yes, there are institutions which seem to support the existence of this stuff called meat, just as there are institutions which support the existence of this thing called God. You know, there are slaughterhouses and butchers, just as there are churches and synagogues. There are recipes and particular bits of cutlery associated with meat, just as there are liturgies and candles and crucifixes associated with particular aspects of God practice. That doesn't mean to say that God exists, and it doesn't really mean to say that meat exists. I think they're both sociological constructions, and to that extent I think the analogy holds. Oops, I've got to turn the camera off, so I'll just show you the day. Look how beautiful it is down here on the canal. Completely frozen. Not frozen quite enough to walk on, I don't think, today.